They always said a mother's love was supposed to be unconditional. What they never told you was how often that love would be tested, not by strangers but by your own blood. Mine started unraveling the day I came home and found my bedroom wasn't mine anymore. It was a Sunday afternoon, I remember that clearly, because I'd just gotten back from a 2-day trip to visit my sister Evelyn in Cedar Falls. It was her birthday, her 77th, and I had promised her lemon pound cake, just like we used to bake when we were girls. The drive back was quiet. The kind of quiet that lets your mind wander into old memories. I thought about the way Daniel used to peek into the oven when I baked, asking, "Is it ready yet, Mama?" with flour on his cheeks. I smiled to myself as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same from the outside. White shutters, a little lopsided now, and the azaleas along the porch, blooming early from the unseasonal warmth. I unlocked the door and stepped in, expecting the usual toys scattered in the hallway, the smell of half-warmed coffee from the morning, maybe Daniel in the recliner pretending to nap with one eye open. But what I got instead was silence. No grandkids running through the house, no laughter, just boxes, 12 of them, labeled with my name in thick Sharpie, stacked neatly by the garage door like packages waiting to be returned. My stomach tightened. "Daniel," I called out, setting down my purse. "Sabrina?" No answer. I walked past the kitchen, sparkling clean, too clean, as if scrubbed for guests. My heart was thudding now. Not with panic exactly, but with something heavier. Something old, the kind of hurt that doesn't shout, it simmers. I turned the corner toward my room, or what used to be my room. The door was wide open. Inside, the bed I had slept in for 8 years was gone. My rocking chair, the one Mark gave me for our anniversary, was gone too. In its place was a queen-sized bed with satin pillow shams, 2 unfamiliar nightstands, and a large suitcase on the floor. On the dresser, a framed photo of Sabrina's parents, smiling at Disneyland, stared back at me like an accusation. I stood frozen. Then I heard footsteps behind me. "Oh, Margaret, you're back early." Sabrina's voice rang out. Sweet, but strained. She was holding a tray of tea, like this was a welcome, like this wasn't a betrayal. I turned slowly. "What is this?" I asked. My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "Oh, I meant to talk to you before you saw everything," she said, stepping carefully into the room like it was hers to explain. "My parents had to move out of their condo suddenly, mold issue, really bad. And the timing just made sense. You were out of town, so we figured we'd use the weekend to get them settled." "In my room," I said. Sabrina shifted. "Well, technically it's the guest room," I laughed. Not out of amusement, but out of disbelief. "I've lived here for 8 years. "Yes, and we appreciate that so much," she said quickly. "But I mean, you have the den. It's cozy, and it's just temporary." The den, a glorified closet with a fold-out couch and no door. Before I could speak, Daniel appeared at the end of the hallway. He looked tired, guilty. That made it worse. "Mom," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I was going to call. It's just everything happened fast." Sabrina's parents didn't have anywhere else to go. "And I do?" I asked quietly. He winced. "It's not like that. You know you're always welcome here. Always welcome. Like a guest." I looked at him for a long time. My son. The boy I held through fever nights. The teenager I drove cross-country for college visits. The man I loaned my retirement fund to buy this house. "I see," I said. And then I turned and walked out of the room. Their room, past the boxes, past the family portraits I noticed now no longer included me, past the kitchen calendar that marked birthdays and dinners, but had no mention of my sisters. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I went to the den. They had set it up nicely. I'll give them that. A fresh pillow, a bottle of lavender room spray, a folded note that read, "Thanks for understanding." Signed with a heart. I sat down on the pullout and looked around. The walls were bare. The window looked out at the neighbor's fence. There was no closet, no drawers. My life, 74 years of it, was in boxes by the garage. I didn't unpack. That night, I lay under a thin quilt and listened to muffled voices down the hall. Laughter, someone clinking a glass, the sounds of a family, one I was no longer part of. And still, I didn't cry. Because sometimes grief doesn't come with tears. Sometimes it comes with stillness. With the quiet realization that love, when taken for granted, curdles into something unrecognizable. The next morning, I rose early. The house was asleep. I made coffee, the strong kind I liked. Not that pod machine nonsense Sabrina preferred. I drank it alone at the table. No one joined me. I opened the back door, stepped onto the porch, and sat in the chair I always did. And for the first time, I let myself think the unthinkable. Maybe it was time to stop asking for a place in their lives. Maybe it was time to claim what was mine. Because I hadn't just helped them buy this house, I had co-signed. I had poured my savings, my late husband Mark's life insurance, into this foundation, and I still had the papers to prove it. They thought I was just the grandmother, just the extra body, just someone whose room could be reassigned. But what they forgot was that this house, it was partly mine, and if they didn't want me in it, as family, well then, they'd hear from me as something else entirely. The word overreacting does something to a person, especially when it's used by your own child, especially when you've just spent the night on a fold-out couch in what used to be your home. That morning, Daniel said it with a nervous laugh and a bite of scrambled eggs. "You're overreacting, Mom," he repeated, shaking his head like I'd just misplaced my glasses again. "It's just for a few weeks." I stared at him from across the kitchen table, the same table where I used to cut his grilled cheese sandwiches into stars, the same table where, last year, I helped his daughter build a papier-mâché volcano for her third-grade science project. And now here I was, suddenly the problem, the inconvenience, the one who couldn't adjust. "I'm not upset that they're here," I said slowly, setting down my coffee mug. "I'm upset that you didn't talk to me, that I came home to find my room, my space gone." Without a word, Daniel leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "We didn't want to stress you. You've been so tired lately. We thought it would be easier this way." "Easier for who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Sabrina breezed into the kitchen then, barefoot, wearing one of those silk robes she always flaunted on her Instagram stories, like she was some kind of lifestyle coach. She kissed Daniel on the cheek, then offered me a strained smile. "Good morning, Margaret. Hope the den was comfortable." I didn't reply. She poured herself a smoothie and sat at the counter, pretending not to hear the weight in the room. Daniel tried again. "They'll be out of the room in no time. You know how fragile her dad's been since the surgery. And her mom, well, she doesn't handle hotels well." "Hotels?" I said, incredulous. "They have 3 houses. They rotate winters in Naples and summers in Colorado. You expect me to believe the only place they could land was my room?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Sabrina broke the silence. "It's not about ownership, Margaret. It's about family adjusting." I looked at her then. Really looked. She had always been careful with her words, strategic. Even when she first married Daniel, there was a guardedness behind her warmth. I once thought it was just nerve, but now I saw it clearer. Sabrina wasn't interested in sharing space. She was interested in controlling it. I stood, calmly. "Enjoy your breakfast," I said. I went to the garage and opened one of the boxes labeled Margaret closet. Inside were my cardigans, some photo frames, and the legal folder, the one I had asked the notary to keep safe after Mark passed. I carried it into the den, shut the door, and sat on the fold-out with my knees stiff. from the night before. The folder still had my name on it, the old deed, the co-signature forms, and the clause, the one Daniel had never read carefully, because he was in too much of a hurry when I handed him that pen years ago. I had retained 25% ownership in the house, not because I didn't trust him, but because the bank had required it. I never thought it would matter. But now, it did. That afternoon I walked into town. It was only a 15-minute stroll, but it felt longer. I passed the bakery where Daniel had worked part-time in high school, the one he quit because the manager asked him to mop floors, and he wasn't raised for that. I passed the church where I still attended Mass every other Sunday, even if no one ever saved me a pew anymore. I stopped at a law office, Melbourne and Tate. The sign had been there forever. I remembered going there once with Mark to update our will. Back then, the hardest decision was how to split the photo albums between our two boys. Now only one son spoke to me, and only one tried to evict me from my own room. The receptionist was a young woman with kind eyes and a nervous energy. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, dear," I said softly, "but I'd like to speak with someone about co-ownership rights, and possibly tenancy laws." She blinked but nodded. "Right this way." The lawyer was a middle-aged man named Tom. He wore glasses and had ink stains on his fingers, which I liked. He looked like someone who worked, not someone who delegated. I laid out the documents, slowly, neatly. He reviewed them for 10 minutes in silence. Then he looked up. "Ms. Whitman," he said, his voice even, "you're not just a co-signer. You're a quarter owner with no expiration clause, which means they cannot relocate you, remove you, or repurpose your living space without your written consent." I nodded. He continued, "If you wanted, you could file a formal objection to unauthorized use of your designated living space. You could even issue a cease and desist for involuntary displacement. It wouldn't be dramatic, just firm, quiet." I said. "I want to do this quietly." He smiled. "Then we'll handle it that way." I left with a manila envelope containing 3 printed documents. I didn't rush. I stopped at the grocery store and bought myself a pint of Rocky Road ice cream, Mark's favorite. I ate it in the park, alone, watching ducks move across the pond like nothing in the world was happening. That night, I heard laughter from my old room again. Sabrina's father had a loud, phlegmy chuckle. Her mother talked in that sing-songy tone that made everything sound like a compliment and a judgment at once. I lay on the fold-out, the envelope beside me like a secret weapon, and I waited. The next morning, Daniel found me sitting at the table with my second cup of coffee. He scratched the back of his head. "Mom, look. We feel awful. Sabrina's parents won't be here long. They're looking at condos next week." I sipped my coffee. He continued, "And maybe we weren't thoughtful about the room thing, but you have to admit, you're making this bigger than it needs to be." There it was again. "You're overreacting." I slid the envelope toward him, calm, measured, not a sound, but the paper brushing the wood. He frowned. "What's this?" "Legal notice," I said. "Nothing formal yet, just a courtesy, outlining my rights, and a timeline for restoration of agreed-upon space, or negotiation for new arrangements." He didn't speak. I continued, "You have 5 days. After that, Mr. Tate will file with the housing board." Daniel blinked. "You hired a lawyer?" "No," I said. "I consulted one. I still believe in family, but now I also believe in boundaries." He opened the folder, scanned it. His face paled. Sabrina entered then, holding a cup of herbal tea. She looked at the folder, then at me, then at Daniel. "What's going on?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer. He just held up the notice. She snatched it from him, read the first paragraph. Her face changed. Not shocked. Calculated. Like someone realizing the table had shifted, and the knife wasn't in her hand anymore. "You're serious?" she said. "I've never been more serious," I replied. She scoffed. "This is petty. You're going to throw legal shade over a bedroom?" "No," I said. "I'm protecting what's mine. since no one else here seems to remember. And then I stood. Not with anger, with finality. Because when your child stops treating you like family, you stop showing up like one. You show up like a co-owner. You show up like a woman with a spine. And when they laugh about your reaction, you don't raise your voice. You raise your documents. I once believed that marriage made you family. That when your son picked a wife, you folded her into the fabric of your life, the way you would fold a new sheet into a linen drawer, gently, with care, trusting that, with time, she'd soften and belong. I don't believe that anymore. After I handed Daniel the envelope, the house changed. Not dramatically, but in the way a room changes when someone blows out a candle and leaves the smoke behind. You could feel the burn, even when the flame was gone. Sabrina didn't speak to me the rest of the day. She flitted from room to room like a hummingbird that had just realized the nectar was laced with vinegar. Her smile, usually painted on like stage makeup, vanished, replaced by a cool indifference that she wore like armor. That evening I walked past my old bedroom. I paused. The door was open. Inside, her parents lounged like they'd signed a lease. Her father sat on my reading chair, the one Mark and I picked out at a flea market in Vermont, with the floral arms and faded velvet. His feet were propped on a suitcase, shoes on. Her mother had draped her silk scarf over my vanity. The mirror I used every morning now held a collection of perfumes that smelled like citrus and entitlement. Neither of them looked up. I stood there for a moment, then turned and walked back to the den. That night I couldn't sleep, not from noise, from knowing what I'd ignored, what I had excused for years. I let little things pass. The way Sabrina always changed the subject when I mentioned family holidays. The way she called her own parents real grandparents in front of my grandchildren. The way she never sent thank you notes for the gifts I bought, even when I hand-stitched blankets for each child. I told myself she was busy, that times had changed, that I needed to adapt. But now I realized I had adapted myself into invisibility. The next morning I rose early, made coffee, sat in the den and stared out the small window. Sabrina's mother came in without knocking. She looked surprised to see me there, then forced a smile. "You are up." "I usually am," I said. She walked past me and opened the kitchen cabinet. "That's where I keep the tea bags," I said gently. She turned. "Oh, well, I moved them. I put all the drinks in the bottom drawer. It's more convenient for shorter folks like me." She smiled again, as if it was some gracious favor. "You moved my kitchen item. I thought it would help. Your organization was a little, let's say, traditional." Traditional. That word clanged in my ears like a dismissal, like old, like outdated. I didn't answer. She made her tea, clanked around, humming something tuneless. Then, as she turned to leave, she said, "Oh, and I took the liberty of hanging a few things in the front hall. I hope you don't mind." She didn't wait for a reply. When she left, I stood and went to the hall. There, where Mark's framed fishing photo used to hang, was a gilded mirror shaped like a sunburst. Under it, a little welcome sign that said "The Taylor Family Est. 2009. Taylor." Their last name. Not ours. Not Whitman. I stared at it for a long time. Later that day, I checked the mailbox. A manila envelope was waiting for me, the second copy of the legal notice from Mr. Tate. I had requested it just in case. I tucked it under my arm. Inside the house, Sabrina sat at the kitchen island with her laptop. I could see spreadsheets open, columns with numbers, tabs labeled vacation, college fund, home equity. She glanced up. "You got the mail?" "Yes," I said. "And I noticed you've redecorated." Her lips twitched. "Just sprucing. The house needed a fresher vibe. Then you should have bought a different one." I replied evenly. Her eyes narrowed. "This is our home now, Margaret. Daniel and I have put a lot into it. You live here, but you need to remember we're the ones building the future." I sat down across from her. "You know, Sabrina," I said calmly, "when you first married my son, I was thrilled. I told Mark you were bright, ambitious, that you'd make Daniel into a stronger man." She blinked. "I thought we'd become close," I continued. "That maybe one day when I was older, you'd sit with me for tea and laugh about how awkward our early conversations were." I leaned in. "But I've realized something." She didn't move. "You don't want family. You want furniture. People who stay in their place and don't make noise." She flushed. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is handing someone your son's heart and watching them mortgage it to the highest bidder." Sabrina stood, face tight. "I have guests to tend to," she snapped. "I'm aware," I said, standing too. "They're sleeping in my bed." She left. That evening Daniel came home late. I was on the porch, watching the dusk settle over the lawn. Fireflies blinked in the distance. He sat beside me, awkwardly. "Mom, Sabrina told me what happened." I nodded. "She said you're upset." "I'm more than upset, Daniel." He exhaled. "Look, we're trying. It's just been tight. Financially. And her parents, they've been helping." That caught my ear. "Helping?" I asked. He hesitated. "I mean, we used some of her dad's connections for the mortgage refinance. And her mom's been handling the property tax stuff. It's just easier this way." Easier. Again, everything in his world was about what was easier for them, not for me. "Do you even remember what Dad always said about this house?" I asked. Daniel looked down. "He said this place was built on choices," I continued. "That every beam was a decision. Every window was a promise. And now you've let people repaint that promise." Daniel didn't reply. I turned toward him. "I'm giving you until the end of the week." He looked up, startled. "To make a decision," I said. "Either you reclaim your home or I reclaim mine." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you've mistaken my kindness for permission." And with that, I rose and went inside. I had 3 more nights in the den, 3 more mornings of waking up to creaking pipes and aching bones from that thin pull-out sofa. 3 more days of waiting for Daniel to remember who raised him, and who still owned the deed he so casually forgot. But I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was preparing. On Wednesday morning, while Sabrina and her mother were out doing what they called aesthetics shopping, I opened the bottom drawer of the hall cabinet and took out a battered green binder. I'd labeled it House Documents back in 1997, after Mark nearly lost our tax papers under a stack of fishing magazines. Inside were years of records, utility bills, contractor invoices, tax returns, even hand-sketched floor plans we'd drawn up the year we installed the bay window in the kitchen. Everything was there. Dates, names, amounts paid, neat, intact. A living map of a house built with care. And at the very front, tucked behind a clear plastic sleeve, was the original deed. Mark's name and mine. No mention of Daniel. No clause about inheritance. No secondary ownership. Just us. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers rested lightly on the embossed seal, the same one we'd received in the mail with a congratulatory note from our first real estate agent. I remember Mark kissed my forehead that day and said, "This is the house our family will remember." And I remember replying, "Because it'll hold them even when we're not here." I hadn't thought about that moment in years. But now, with her velvet curtains hanging in my living room, and her father's toothbrush in my ensuite bathroom, It felt like the house itself was trying to speak, trying to remind me of what it was never meant to become. I made a few phone calls that afternoon, quiet ones. First to Mrs. Ortega, the elderly neighbor next door who still remembered when Daniel used to ride his tricycle in her drive. Then to Mark's old friend Ron, who once helped us build the backyard fence. And finally to Henry Tate, the attorney. I wasn't looking for confrontation. I was gathering witnesses. People who'd seen this house before it was a showroom for Sabrina's curated life. People who'd walked these floors when the walls still echoed with laughter, not silence. By Friday, I had everything I needed, except Daniel. He'd been avoiding me since our porch talk. No breakfasts, no updates, just a shadow slipping in and out of the house like a guest in his own home. I decided not to wait any longer. That evening, I asked him to sit down. Sabrina was gone, off having dinner with her parents at a steakhouse downtown. The children were at a friend's house. It was just us. He looked tired, worn in the way people look when they've been living two lives, and neither is working. I poured us each a cup of tea, set the binder between us on the table. I want to show you something, I said gently. Daniel raised his eyebrows but didn't object. I opened the binder, turned it toward him. This is the house, I said. On paper, in records. In fact, he stared at the page, said nothing. I built this home with your father. Every nail, every shingle, every mortgage payment. We paid for it with our hands and our hope. Daniel looked away. You live here, I said. You and Sabrina, and your children. But don't confuse that with ownership. I let you live here because I wanted to help. I paused. But help doesn't mean sacrifice, and it certainly doesn't mean erasure. He said nothing. I have never asked for rent, I've never demanded anything, but you allowed your wife's parents to move into my bedroom, my space, and pretended it was reasonable. Still nothing. So now I'm setting terms, I said, my voice level. You have 1 week, 1 week to find them, another place to stay, 1 week to return this home to what it was, a place where everyone knew their place, and no one forgot the roof they stood under. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, things are tight right now. We're trying to get ahead. Sabrina's parents were supposed to be temporary. Temporary doesn't redecorate, I replied. Temporary doesn't hang new family name signs or rearrange cabinets. Temporary doesn't unpack emotional suitcases. His eyes dropped. I don't want to evict anyone, I said. But I will if I have to. He looked up then, startled. You'd evict us? No, I said slowly. Just them, unless you choose to go with them. Daniel's lips parted, but he couldn't find words. I stood, collected the binder, and walked to my room, the den technically, and closed the door behind me. The next morning, the house was silent, not awkward quiet, tense quiet, a silence that gripped the walls and made every creak of the floorboards feel like an intrusion. Sabrina didn't speak to me. Her mother glanced at me in the hallway, but didn't say a word. Her father stayed in the bedroom most of the day. I made soup, ate alone. That night, just before bed, Daniel slipped an envelope under my door. Inside was a short letter. Mom, I've asked them to make arrangements to leave by next week. I'm sorry it took this to make me see what I should have known from the start. Daniel, there were no flourishes, no apologies that felt dressed in excuses. Just a decision. One I had needed for far too long. I didn't cry, but I did exhale deeply, as if I'd been holding my breath since the day they unpacked in my room. On Sunday, Sabrina confronted me. She found me in the garden. I was trimming the rose bushes, careful not to nick the still growing buds. She didn't yell, she didn't even raise her voice, but her words cut just the same. "You've humiliated us," she said. I stood straight, wiped my hands on my apron. "You did that yourselves," I replied. "You're selfish. You've always been bitter about me." "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "I was hopeful. That was my mistake." Her voice broke then. "Do you even care about what this does to Daniel? To the kids?" "Of course I do," I said softly. "That's why I'm still here. But make no mistake. This was never just about a bedroom." She blinked. "It was about respect. About the slow, silent erosion of belonging. About watching my space become your space, while being told I should be grateful for the scrap." Sabrina's eyes filled with tears. But she didn't cry. She turned and walked away. I didn't stop her, 'cause I'd already learned. Silence can be a weapon, but it can also be a boundary. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind was cool. The room smelled like roses. Not new ones, but the old, familiar kind. The ones that belonged to me. I woke up that Monday morning to the sound of dragging. Not footsteps. Not the hum of a vacuum or the clink of breakfast dishes. But the deliberate scrape of suitcase wheels over hardwood floors. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't even loud. It was the sound of quiet resentment, dressed as civility. I didn't get out of bed right away. I laid there a moment longer, staring at the ceiling fan spinning gently above me, listening to every inch of that suitcase make its journey down the hall. They were leaving, just like Daniel said they would. I got up, put on my robe and walked to the window. A silver SUV idled in the driveway. Sabrina's father stood by the trunk, arms folded, back still. Her mother appeared in the doorway next, dragging a second suitcase, a burgundy one that still had the plastic wrapping around the handles. She looked up toward my window. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She didn't smile. I didn't either. When I walked into the kitchen, Sabrina was there. She stood by the coffee pot, like it was a shield. Her arms were crossed, and her mouth was set in that thin, tight way people hold when they're forcing themselves not to speak the truth. Daniel was nowhere in sight. "They'll be gone in an hour," she said flatly, not looking at me. "All right," I replied, pouring myself a glass of water. She didn't move. "I hope you're happy. You've made your point." I turned to face her. It was never about making a point. It was about reclaiming a line that should never have been crossed. She scoffed. "You just can't handle not being the center of everything anymore, can you?" That got under my skin. I set the glass down gently. "Sabrina," I said, "I handled being invisible for years." I smiled through it, swallowed it, dressed it in patience and called it understanding. "But there comes a time when silence becomes betrayal. To yourself." She stared at me. And for a moment I thought she might actually say something sincere. But instead she shook her head and muttered, "Unbelievable," before storming off. An hour later they were gone. The house felt strange. Not quieter, not cleaner. Just less tense, as if it could finally exhale. I walked down the hall to my old bedroom and stood at the door. It was open. The lavender curtains I once loved were gone, replaced with heavy taupe drapes. The comforter was new, the kind with geometric patterns that looked like something from a furniture catalog. On the nightstand, they'd left behind a diffuser and an open box of chamomile tea. I didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, I went back to the kitchen, took out a pad of paper and started writing a list. A list of things I needed to do. Not just to reclaim my room, but to reclaim my presence in this home. Repaint the walls. Take the drapes down, air out the closet, have the locks changed. That last one sat on the page for a moment, then I underlined it. Twice. That evening Daniel finally came home. He walked in quietly, placed his keys on the counter, and looked around like he didn't recognize his own kitchen. I sat at the table, sipping tea. He hesitated, then joined me. "They're settled in at a rental near the lake," he said. "It's not ideal, but it'll do for now." I nodded. "Good." He rubbed his face. "Sabrina's angry." "I know. She thinks you blindsided us." I set my tea down. "And what do you think?" He looked tired. Older than his 36 years. "I think I let it go too far. I think I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as just part of the house." There it was, the confession. "That's the problem with comfort," I said. "It can become entitlement if you're not careful." He looked at me then, fully. "Mom, are you planning to kick us out too?" I blinked. "No," I said slowly. "But I am going to change the ownership structure, not to punish you, to protect myself." His jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means I've spoken with an attorney. The house will go into a living trust. Under my name only. No automatic inheritance. No access without consent. It's still my house, Daniel. I'm just making sure no one forgets that again." He didn't speak. Just nodded. A slow, tired nod. And that was enough. The next morning, Sabrina was cold. Polite, but distant. The children were quiet around me, not because they were afraid, but because they sensed the shift. Children always do. I spent the day restoring my room. I opened windows, aired out drawers, peeled back the layers they'd left behind. I found one of Mark's old flannel shirts in the back of the closet. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust. That night I slept in my bed again, and it felt like returning to my name. It was a Tuesday when the certified mail came. I had just finished folding laundry sheets mostly, soft ones I had pulled from the back of the linen closet, when I reclaimed my room. The house was still. Sabrina had taken the kids to a dentist appointment, and Daniel was at work. I didn't expect company, let alone a knock at the door. The mail carrier handed me the envelope with a neutral smile. "Signature required," he said. I signed, thanked him, and stared at the heavy cream envelope in my hands. No return address, just my name, written in thick, deliberate print. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it with a butter knife. Inside, a letter from Sabrina. Not handwritten, typed, formal, cold. She was contesting the legality of the trust. She claimed undue influence, that I was of compromised mental capacity when I filed it, that Daniel had been unaware and opposed to the changes. She cited outdated medical notes from a sprained wrist last year, where I'd mentioned dizziness from a new medication. She'd attached a printout of them, and then came the second page, a demand to reverse the trust, or face court proceedings. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. I just sat there, letting the silence around me grow deep. She wasn't just trying to undermine me. She was trying to erase me. I stood up, walked to the sink, and ran cold water over my wrists. A habit from years ago when I needed to stay grounded during Mark's treatments. The shock brought clarity. I called Carol. She picked up on the second ring. "Margaret, I need your help." Again. She didn't ask questions. "Come by at 3. Bring the letter." Carol read the letter, 3 times, each slower than the last. She was in her reading glasses now, the thin ones she kept on a chain around her neck. "She's bold," she finally said. "But stupid," she explained calmly. The trust was airtight. The paperwork had been filed through proper channels. The physicians who signed my competency forms were independent and recent. Sabrina's attached notes were irrelevant and misleading. "She's banking on intimidation," Carol said. "I'm hoping you'll cave because court sounds scary." "I won't," I replied. Carol smiled softly. "I know. We drafted a response. Direct, professional, firm. We included copies of the medical competency evaluation dated just 2 months prior. We warned that any further attempts to interfere would be seen as harassment, and responded to legal. We sent it via registered mail that very evening. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting. He stood in the kitchen, arms folded, that furrowed brow he got from Mark deepening. "She told me what she sent," he said. "Did she tell you what I replied with?" I asked, setting down my purse. "She said you're overreacting." I didn't flinch. "She threatened to take me to court." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know she was going to do that. I told her to leave it alone. And yet, she didn't." He paused. "She thinks you're punishing us." I stared at him. "Let me be clear, Daniel. This trust is not punishment. It's protection. Protection I should have had in place years ago." He looked down, quiet. "I know you're in the middle," I said. "But you need to understand. There is no middle anymore. When someone is trying to dismantle my independence." "I just want peace," he murmured. "Then you'd better start looking for it in truth, not in convenience." That night, I sat by the fireplace with a book I didn't open. My mind wandered. To Mark, to the early days with Daniel, to the smell of the first apartment we lived in, the way we used to dance in the kitchen before we had furniture. And now this, a son divided, a daughter-in-law wielding manipulation like a knife. It was never supposed to be this way, but life rarely is. The next day brought another surprise. A knock on the door again. It was Daniel. Alone. No coat, just a folder in his hand. "I need to talk," he said. I let him in. He sat at the table, placed the folder between us. "I found this," he said, "in Sabrina's desk drawer. I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for a charger." I opened the folder. Inside were papers, bank statements, plans, a folder labeled "Contingency if Margaret refuses," a detailed outline of selling the house, estimated sale price, rental properties scoped out. One of them was a senior living community. My name written next to a unit number. "She was planning to move me out?" Daniel nodded. "She never said it out loud, but yes." I closed the folder. A strange calm settled over me, like knowing the truth was painful, but no longer surprising. Daniel looked broken. "I didn't know it had gotten this far." "You didn't want to know," I said. "And that's what hurts the most." That night, I filed a no-contact clause in the trust against Sabrina, barring her from any influence, direct or indirect, over the property or my affairs. Carol executed it that same week. The legal wheels were turning now, and I wasn't backing down. It was strange how something so small could feel so heavy. The envelope was plain, white, and unassuming. No logo, no return address, just my name, written in sharp, mechanical handwriting. Margaret Hartley. I almost didn't open it. I was standing by the kitchen sink, a cup of tea still steeping, when I noticed the letter mixed in with the usual stack of coupons and real estate flyers. But something about it, maybe the lack of return address, made my fingers pause, made my stomach curl in that quiet, instinctual way that told me this wasn't junk, this wasn't harmless. I opened it, and I read, and I felt every word like a thorn dragged across the skin. It was from Sabrina's father. 3 pages, single-spaced, typed in a cold, calculated tone that tried and failed to come off polite. He called it a clarification. He claimed he wanted to document the emotional hardship I had apparently caused his daughter and her husband by unfairly altering the family's housing arrangement. He accused me of stoking division, acting with paranoia, and most galling of all, disrupting the well-being of the grandchildren, who had grown accustomed to the new family structure. I sat down, not because I was tired, but because if I didn't sit, I might throw the letter into the fireplace while it was still clutched in my hands. He had the nerve, the audacity to suggest that I should consider transferring ownership of the home to a neutral entity, where Daniel and Sabrina could continue managing the residence for the good of the extended family. A neutral entity, my own son and daughter-in-law managing my house, as if I were the tenant, as if my existence were merely in the way of their plans. He ended the letter with a thinly veiled threat. I hope we can resolve this amicably and avoid the need for unnecessary formal involvement. Formal involvement. He meant court, he meant lawyers, he meant war. I didn't cry, not this time. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it back into the envelope, and slid it into the drawer beside the silverware, the same drawer where I once kept Daniel's childhood drawings and crayon-scribbled birthday cards. Then I picked up the phone and called Judith. Her voice was calm, steady. "Bring it in," she said, "and stop handling this alone." I called Carol next. "I didn't even have to explain," she said. "I'll be there by 4. We're not letting this go unanswered." That afternoon, we sat at my kitchen table. Carol, Judith, and Judith laid the letter out and read it aloud, pausing only to scoff or underline a phrase. Carol kept notes, her lips pressed tight, as if trying to hold back a lifetime of fury. When Judith finished, she looked up. "This isn't just rude," she said. "This is coordinated." Carol nodded. "They were waiting for you to get tired, to back down. But they underestimated you," Judith added. "And that was their biggest mistake." We drafted a response, not to Sabrina's father directly, but to Daniel and Sabrina. It was firm, unapologetic, legally sound. We included a certified statement affirming the validity and irrevocability of the living trust. We referenced the coercion clause. And then Judith did something I hadn't expected. She drafted a cease and desist letter to prevent further harassment. She said, "This isn't a conversation anymore. This is a line in the sand." I signed everything, hands steady, heart still. That evening, Daniel came home late. He looked surprised when he saw Carol still sitting in the living room, her coat draped over the armrest. He looked even more surprised when I handed him the envelope. "What's this?" "A response," I said. He opened it, scanned it quickly. His face paled. "Mom, this is..." I didn't flinch. "A boundary. A legal one." His eyes darted from the papers to Carol, then back to me. "You're escalating things." "No," Carol said coolly. "We're ending things." He tried to argue. Tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that Sabrina's father just gets ahead of himself, that none of this was meant to turn ugly. But I'd heard it all before. I looked at my son, the boy who once held my hand in parking lots, cried when his goldfish died, and saw a man who had let comfort become entitlement, who had mistaken access for ownership. "I raised you better than this," I said softly. And for once he didn't deny it. The next morning, Sabrina didn't speak to me. She walked past me in the hallway like I was a shadow. But the children were different. Emma, my youngest granddaughter, peeked into the kitchen as I was folding dish towel. She looked nervous, like she knew the air in the house had changed, and didn't know why. "Grandma," she said, voice small. "Are we in trouble?" I turned, knelt down, and held her hands. "No, sweetheart, no one's in trouble. Grown-ups just forgot how to use their words kindly. But we're figuring it out." She nodded slowly. "Okay." Then she hugged me tightly, as if she could feel the whole house holding its breath. Later that day, the mail came. Another envelope, but this time, it wasn't from Sabrina's father. It was from a local real estate agent, and inside was a property listing, not for my home, but for a new one, a private listing, a nearby 2-bedroom cottage by the lake. It wasn't Judith who sent it, and it wasn't Carol either. There was no note, just a post-it stuck to the top corner that said, "In case you ever decide you want peace on your own terms." I sat there, staring at it, because for the first time I realized maybe this war wasn't about staying. Maybe it was about walking away with everything intact, including my dignity. The envelope was heavier than I expected, cream color, embossed with a thick return address in Virginia, and inside 6 dense paragraphs, typed in Times New Roman, signed with a shaky pen stroke that told me it had been done in anger. Sabrina's father had written me a letter, a real one, not an email, not a forwarded message through Daniel, an actual letter. He'd taken the time to buy a stamp and lick an envelope, just to call me vindictive, ungrateful, and emotionally unstable. He accused me of ruining a perfectly functional living arrangement and souring his grandchildren's environment with legal threats. He said I had disrespected the generosity extended to me by younger adults trying to accommodate an aging woman's needs. I read it once, then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because something in me, something that had stayed clenched for far too long, finally unclenched. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in my shredder, and listened to the satisfying grind of entitlement turning to paper dust. Then I sat down and began to write one of my own, not to him, to myself. The following Sunday, I made lemon bars. From scratch, just the way Mark used to like them, with extra zest and a dusting of powdered sugar so thick it left fingerprints. I set them on the table with a note that read, "Help yourself." I knew the kids would wander into the kitchen eventually. They always did when something smelled like comfort. I wasn't bitter anymore. But I also wasn't baking to please anyone. That evening, I found Daniel sitting on the back porch, holding one of the lemon bars in his hand like it was a relic. "You remember when Dad used to pack these in my lunchbox?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't say anything for a while, just took a bite and chewed slowly. "I think I've been holding on to too many things," he said. "Old assumptions, resentments, expectations." I said nothing. "And maybe," he added, swallowing, "I let Sabrina run the show, because it was easier than making hard choices." Now I spoke. "And now," he looked at me, "now I want to make better ones." He told me they'd found a small rental a few towns over, nothing permanent, just space to breathe, to think, to raise the kids without so much tension between the walls. "They'll still see you," he added. "I'd like them to see you, not out of guilt, out of love." That last part caught me, the way he said it, quiet, clear, no manipulation, just a son trying to step back into decency. I reached over and patted his hand. "That's a start." By the end of that week, they'd packed their things. There was no ceremony, no explosion, just boxes, a moving truck, and the soft thud of a door that no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like peace. Sabrina barely spoke to me as she left. That was fine. Sometimes dignity is measured in silence. Daniel hugged me before getting into the car. The kids waved from the back seat. I waved back with a genuine smile. And when the car disappeared down the road, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt anchored. In the days that followed, I did something I hadn't done in years. I redecorated the bedroom they'd claimed. I turned it into a library. Bookshelves from floor to ceiling, a worn leather armchair, a reading lamp that hummed with the gentlest warmth. My old room. I kept it for myself, but I stripped it of every artifact of who I used to be for them. New sheets, new drapes, a lavender diffuser that I picked this time. The room smelled like clarity. I even had the locks changed, just like I wrote on that first list. A new key, a new threshold, the same old house. But for the first time in years, it felt like mine. Carol came by one afternoon with 2 cups of tea and a smirk. Heard through the grapevine that Sabrina's trying to convince her parents they were mistreated, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Let them spin their version. Carol grinned. You're not even going to defend yourself. I sipped my tea. I don't need to. The truth doesn't need marketing. She nodded approvingly. Still, she added, that clause. Brilliant. We clinked cups like teenagers with a secret. Weeks passed. The silence became something else. No longer sharp, just wide, spacious, peaceful. One morning, I walked into my new library, sat in the leather chair, and pulled out a blank journal. At the top of the first page, I wrote, here's what happens when a woman stops apologizing for taking up space. And I filled 2 pages, then 4, then 10. Stories poured out of me. Not just this one. Others, memories I had buried beneath layers of politeness, disappointments I'd called just part of life, small joys I'd never given voice to. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a bedroom. It was about reclamation of space, of worth, of self. Months later, I hosted a small dinner, just a few friends from the neighborhood. No one called me Mom or Grandma that night, just Margaret or Maggie, if they'd known me long enough. We had lasagna, red wine, and laughter that lingered past midnight. No one sat in anyone else's chair. No one questioned the locks on my door. That night, when I turned in, I didn't just sleep in my room. I rested in it. A few days after that, I received a text from Daniel, just 2 lines. Thinking about everything. Grateful you held your ground. Love you, Mom. I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd held the line, held the truth, held myself. If you've ever felt erased in your own home, I want you to know, it's not too late to draw new boundaries, to reclaim the name they whispered past, to stand up even if your voice shakes. Because sometimes, the most radical thing an older woman can do is simply say, no, this is still mine. And if they want back in, well, this time, they'll have to